Hey everyone. So as the trade deadline season sort of comes up, and I get more of a sense of who's got trade value, who doesn't, what teams are looking for, um, I decided, let's have a little bit of a fun exercise, and let's go through every single Major League Baseball team and find which contract is the worst contract on each of their books. So I went through every team. We're gonna go through alphabetical order. I'm gonna talk to you guys about which contract I think is the worst contract on every team. So let's start with the Arizona Diamondbacks. The worst contract on the Arizona Diamondbacks is starting pitcher Zach Greinke. He's being paid $35 million, which is 27.5% of their payroll, um, until for 2 years left after this season. He's 36 years old, or will be 36. He right now has a 2.93/3.2 ERA/FIP, worth 3.4 WAR, which is incredible. But then you consider his age, just the incredible size of that payroll, and how it's unmovable, and how the D-backs, in my opinion, the reason why this contract is bad is because the D-backs need a rebuild. They've been doing this thing where they kind of contend and they kind of build for the future. They did that with the Goldschmidt trade by acquiring Weaver and Kelly instead of more long-term prospects with higher upside. Kelly's good though, but what I'm saying is that if they want to actually try and win a World Series instead of just maybe make a wild card game, they need to rebuild. And the Greinke contract keeps them from rebuilding. So that's why, even though he's a great player, he still is an ace. Because he cannot be moved and he's keeping them from rebuilding, it's keeping the D-backs in mediocrity, which is the worst thing a sports team can be in. So next up with the Braves would be starting pitcher Julio Teheran, $11.166 million, which is 8.56% of their payroll. He has a club option next year at $12 million, so the term isn't an issue. But when I look at the Braves' books, they actually have pretty clean salaries. They got Donaldson, who's their highest paid player, but he's only on a 1-year deal, so they really aren't paying very much for all their players, especially when you combine the Albies contract and the Acuna contract. They're in a really good place financially. But the thing with the Teheran contract is just I had to pick one out of all of that, and Teheran has a 3.67 ERA this year, but he's got a really bad 4.57 FIP and a xFIP of 5.21, which means that he's doing much better than he probably should be. So when you consider how much he's being paid, going into the playoffs, is he going to be a reliable starter, giving the underlying numbers? Maybe, but is he sort of worth the money that he's being paid now? And so that's sort of where I come from when I'm choosing the contracts. Next up, Baltimore Orioles. I think you guys are probably going to know what I'm going to say. First baseman Chris Davis, being paid $21 million, which is 30% of their payroll until 2023. He's been worth a 53 WRC plus, which is he's about half as good as the average run creator, batting 187/266. He was worth negative 3.1 WAR last season, the worst season ever in history, and he's worth negative something 1 point something WAR this season with only 7 homers. So it's basically he's an offensive void, massive strain on their payroll, and they're not going to get out of it until 2023 because why would you pay so much money, especially with so much deferred money that Chris Davis has for an aging slugger? It's an impulsive decision by an owner that doesn't make sense, and that's why certain baseball teams, especially the Oilers, are dumpster fires. But that's we learn lessons from these contracts. But up next, Boston Red Sox. Their worst contract would be I was thinking David Price just because of how much money is owed, but then David Price was crucial. I mean, David Price is still David Price, he's still an ace pitcher. So I thought let's pivot to a different starting pitcher, Nathan Eovaldi, $17 million until 2023. 7.5% of their payroll, which makes you realize just how staggeringly large the Red Sox payroll actually is. But anyway, he struggled with injuries this season. He's been worth zero. He's been below replacement level, and he was worth only 2 WAR last season, which is what earned him his money. I know he was legendary in the playoffs. He had that incredible World Series game where he pitched so much. I get why they made the contract, kind of, but they're paying him $17 million exclusively for his decline, which is not something you want to do. So that's why I think that the Eovaldi contract is the worst contract on the Red Sox. All right, so up next, after Nathan Eovaldi, would be the Chicago Cubs, the worst team in baseball. And the Cubs, in my opinion, their worst contract would be another starting pitcher, Yu Darvish, $20 million being paid, 10% of their payroll. They're paying exclusively for his decline, actually, because he's getting up there in terms of his age, and they're still paying for him. And so when you consider the Yu Darvish contract, they basically chose him over Arrieta. And so he's 32 years old. They're paying him until he's 36 years old at 2023. And when you consider that term, that's just, 2023 will be the last year of his contract, so 2024 is when it expires. 4.54 ERA, 4.84 FIP, 0.8 WAR, massive injury issues, and like I said before, they're paying only for his decline. He's not in his prime anymore. The 5 WAR Darvish that used to exist does not exist anymore, and that's not what they're paying. They're paying for a player that doesn't exist. That's the big issue for them. And that's really hurting their payroll. The Hayward contract, because Hayward's had such a bounce back year, I think the Darvish contract is worse because when he does give you innings, he doesn't give you good innings. But he doesn't also always give you those innings because he's injured, which is an issue, and it's just going to get worse as he gets older. So that Darvish contract, really bad. Next up, White Sox. And the White Sox have also pretty clean books. Nothing all that bad. Abreu's expensive, but he's also on a one-year deal. He's on an expiring deal, and he's still a good player. So I would say the retained salary that they still have after releasing Yonder Alonso would be their worst contract, $7.7 million, which is 8.38% of their payroll. He had a 57 WRC plus for the team, minus 1.6 WAR for them, which is really bad. I actually got to make sure that it was minus 1.6 WAR really quick because it might have been the base running stats. But either way, it's not really. I guess if they're trying to tank, it's decent. Like if they're trying to lose, but obviously, having a negative WAR player. Minus 1.2 WAR, so still not good. Having a minus 1.2 WAR player for that kind of money, for almost 10% of your payroll, is a bad contract, especially now that he's not paying for them, but they don't really have any long-term anchors on their team, so when you have to pick the worst contract, Yonder Alonso stands out just because of how bad he's been this season. Next would be Joey Votto of the Cincinnati Reds. Now, yes, I know Joey Votto, Hall of Fame player, one of the greatest, most patient players of all time. That being said, when you look at his stats, he's 36 years old, being paid $25 million until 2023 with a 2024 club option. That's definitely not going to be taken. He was worth 6.5 WAR 2 seasons ago, 3.5 WAR last season, and only 0.4 WAR this season. His OBP went from 4.54 to 4.17 to now 0.349. His home runs went down from 36 to 12 to 9, and as he gets older, 36, 37, 38 years old, he's going to be paid the same, but he's going to be just even worse. When you consider he's a first base only hitter, and he's now more of a league average hitter than he ever was. And when you consider how much he's being paid, that's a really bad contract. So I love Joey Votto, Canadian hero, but he's just not as good as he really should be for what he's being paid. So that's the big issue with him. Next up would be on the Cleveland Indians. Now, Carlos Santana is their highest paid player, but he was an all-star, he's had a great season, and the term is not that bad. So when you consider next up who the worst contract would be, it'd be second baseman Jason Kipnis, making $15 million, which is 12% of their payroll. He's a pending UFA. But when you consider the Indians' situation, this was like one of the last years of their window, and in one of the last years with Lindor, you cannot be paying 12% of your payroll to a player who's a replacement level player. That's just not something you can do when you're trying to compete. And so that impacted the Indians' ability to actually make a good offseason, which they were completely unable to. The Indians basically punted on the offseason, had to shed salary with players like Yonder Alonso. Yonder Alonso was an example. That was a good way to shed salary. They had to shed salary with Yan Gomes, and they just genuinely have been really negatively impacted in their ability to compete this season because of that Kipnis contract. And it's although it's a pending UFA contract, it's still bad because he's worth 73 WRC plus and has not been above 100 since 2016, and it's just been a replacement level player. And for a team that has very little money like the Indians, they just can't afford to be paying that. Next up on the Colorado Rockies, I chose Ian Desmond, their utility man / center fielder / shortstop. I don't even know, first baseman, as their worst contract. He's been worth negative 1.3 WAR over the 3 years of that contract. He's a 93 WRC plus this year, but with a really high BABIP. And I know that WRC plus is park adjusted, but he's still playing on course field, which affects it. He was last above 100. He's been a below average hitter for most of his career. He's got a high BABIP, which is probably what's fueling his resurgence. Well, if you count 93 WRC plus as a resurgence. And there's a lot of term left as he goes into his late 30s. He'll be being paid that he's 36, 37, that stuff. So it's just a bad contract, genuinely. And I know I keep saying, yeah, it's just a bad contract. When you consider the value versus what he's being paid, it's just not enough. And when you consider that offseason, right from the start, that contract never really made sense. And it still doesn't make sense when you consider, the value investments that could have made in other areas. But anyway, next would be the Detroit Tigers. Miguel Cabrera, first baseman, legendary hitter, one of the greatest hitters of all time, definitely. But he's being paid $30 million until 2024 when he's 43 years old, which is 25% of their payroll. He's been a below-average hitter with a 90 WRC plus and been worth negative .4 WAR his last full season. Was also sub 100 WRC plus. So he's been a below-average hitter, excluding his 38 games last season. He's only going to get worse as he gets deeper into his late 30s / early 40s. And for a team that's got to start building, their rebuild's been decent, but they got to start, designating that core, paying $30 million to someone who's not good anymore and just going to be getting worse is a really bad financial anchor. Now, next up would be the Houston Astros. They actually have really clean books. They have some expensive contracts like Brantley and Verlander and Altuve, but those contracts are all worth it at the time being, and they look like they're going to be worth it into the future. But when you consider, their bad contracts, their worst contract probably would be Josh Reddick, right fielder, 32 years old, making $13 million with one more year left, 98 WRC plus, worth only one win. So he's an average hitter for a corner outfield spot. That's not ideal. And he's been worth one WAR. So it's not like it's not an anchor, but you have to choose a bad contract for every team. And he's just the worst that they have because he keeps someone like Kyle Tucker from getting regular at-bats. But I assume if they really wanted Kyle Tucker to get regular at-bats, he'd be playing instead of Reddick. But when they have such good contracts that Reddick, while it's a bad contract, isn't a terrible contract, but it's the worst one that they have. Kansas City, starting pitcher Danny Duffy, $15 million per season with, I think, a few more seasons, and he's going to regress further as he gets older because he's 30 years old. It's 15% of their payroll. It's got a 4.32 ERA, 4.6 FIP, with a 4.98 expected FIP. Worth one WAR because he's pitching innings, but are those innings good? No. The innings are good innings. Sorry, the innings are not good innings, but he's giving you innings, which is why he's above replacement level. But would you want to start him in a playoff game? No. Would you really feel comfortable starting him in a game and thinking, yeah, you're probably going to win that? No. So, yes, his contract, is really bad, and yes, he's not a below replacement level player, but when you combine how much he's being paid with the term, with the situation the Royals are in, it's just the worst contract they have on the books. Alex Gordon is also bad, but he's doesn't have much term, and he's been good this season. Salvi Perez is the same thing, but he's a leader, I guess. But Danny Duffy, just as a whole, is all around the worst contract that they have. And when you think about it, a team's paying Danny Duffy 50% of their payroll. That's not good. Next up, Los Angeles Angels, designated hitter Albert Pujols. Very similar situation to Miguel Cabrera. Legendary hitter that's just not good anymore. $29.5 million till 2021. He's soon to be 40. Below average hitter, 99 WRC plus this year. 0.2 WAR. No, literally zero speed, and he takes ABs away from Ohtani, who also needs to play DH. Though Pujols could play first baseman, but bad first base. Either way, he should be retired. He just would not why would he give up the cash that he's being owed by retiring? He's just an average to below average hitter with no speed. That's really hurting their ability to contend because you consider they have Mike Trout. Could you imagine what they could do with an extra $30 million in their payroll that's not going to a below replacement level player? They could really make an impact and add an impact starting pitcher that they really need. With that $30 million in extra payroll space, they could add someone like Greinke. Could you imagine them with an ace like Greinke or David Price. Like, it's just such a shame, and it makes me sad as someone who really wants to see Mike Trout succeed that they have that kind of anchor. But that's why Albert Pujols is definitely the worst contract on their books. Next up would be the LA Dodgers, and their worst contract is the one they recently signed with AJ Pollock. The Kershaw contract is kind of rough, but he's still Clayton Kershaw, so I can't, in good faith, make him the worst contract, considering also the term isn't that bad. For AJ Pollock, he's making from $10 to $15 million until he's 36 years old. He's got a 101 WRC plus, but only .7 WAR because it's only 38 games, which was the largest issue in coming into his free agency. Was he just cannot stay healthy, and that's been the case this season. And so while he's played, he's been an average hitter and been worth above replacement level. He's only going to get older as he gets deeper into his 30s. He's not going to be able to play center field anymore once he gets older. And the injury concerns, he's just not able to stay healthy. So you want to pay for someone who's on the field, and Pollock can't stay on the field, and that's why he's a negative value contract. Next up, Miami Marlins. Wei-Yin Chen is their worst contract. He's being, it was a 26.67% of their payroll until 2021. 7.58 ERA /5.44 FIP, worth negative .4 wins above replacement, and only 38 innings pitched. He's not he's not a good starting pitcher anymore. He can't just give you innings like he used to be able to. He's someone who you should not be pitching. Like he just shouldn't, and they're paying him so much. So he's just overall like $20 million for him is just not worth it. He's not even a mid-rotation arm that he's paid to be. And for the Marlins, they really could, that payroll space could have gone to keeping someone like Stanton. I mean, they spent all their time trying to clear their payroll, but, those efforts are hurt by still having a negative value contract like Wei-Yin Chen on the books. So he's not like a massive thing because 2021 is relatively soon, but it's still for a team that's got to be starting to build a really bad anchor that they have and that they have to deal with. Next, Milwaukee Brewers, Ryan Braun. I know he's a former MVP. I know he's still, a 104 WRC plus 1 WAR player. Like, he's still an above average player, but his BABIP is higher, which is causing that resurgence. He was worth almost negative WAR last season, or worth negative WAR last season. My bad. He is, has some injury concerns. He's been regressing, and they're paying him $18 million, which is 15% of their payroll until 2022. And for a team that was a win away from the World Series, those financial anchors are crippling, especially for a team that's not known to be a financial juggernaut like Milwaukee. So Ryan Braun, great player, great person, but is he worth his contract? No. Is it the worst contract to have in the books? Yes. Next, on Minnesota. Minnesota also has pretty clean books, nothing all that bad, but their worst contract would be Addison Reed, relief pitcher. It's retained salary because they released him. He posted a 4.5/5.11 ERA/FIP, worth negative .2 WAR in 56 relief innings last season, and he's currently a free agent because he's just that bad. He was signed. I thought it was actually a good signing. I was really disappointed when he first got signed because I wanted him to sign with the Indians, but it just did not go well in Minnesota, and it has not gone well, and he's just lost his ability to pitch major league innings, and they're still paying him $8 million, which for a team that's also not a financial juggernaut is a decent chunk of change. But next up, I've already talked about this in my last video, the Robinson Cano contract in the New York Mets, $24 million until he's 40, not been the same since his PED suspension, worth 90 WRC plus .1 WAR, which is just after his 3 home run games, so it's obviously a little bit swayed by that, hitting 257/298. He's a below average hitter who's being paid $24 million for his hitting as he's getting till 40 years old. You should not be paying someone in their decline $24 million, even if they're a slightly above average hitter. It's just not worth it. And yet Cano, they traded good prospects to acquire that contract and Edwin Diaz. Yes, they acquired a closer, which is a notoriously volatile asset that that's backfired, obviously, for them because, he's shown his volatility with all of his blown saves. That being said, they also took on the Cano contract, which I think they didn't even see as a negative value asset, even though he so is a negative value asset, and they're being burned for it. And so The Mets, in their attempt to compete with this roster, chose the wrong way to allocate their financial resources, allocating it to a bad player like Cano, and as a result, they're having a bad season. Again, another lost season, wasting the primes of DeGrom and Syndergaard. And really, when you think about it, that was a bad trade in itself. But they just need to blow up at this point. Like, they need to just rebuild at this point. They need to have their core with McNeil. Actually, McNeil could really give them a good return. But they have such good players with McNeil and Alonso and Conforto and Syndergaard and DeGrom. But it's just these anchors of contracts that are really damaging them. And like I said before, that Brody Van Wagenen has been a real issue with their team in general. But I really think just that Cano contract is one of the worst contracts on the books in baseball. Next, speaking of worst contracts on the book in baseball, New York Yankees, worst contract, Giancarlo Stanton, outfielder/DH, former NL MVP, but they're paying him $30 million until 2029. For someone whose game is purely based off of his power, like his offensive value is based off of his ability to hit for power. Someone who strikes out a ton. I may be wrong, but players of his archetype typically don't age well, right? So when you consider he's already not worth the $30 million he's being paid because he can't, he's been injured this season, so that's also an issue. But he also just was not as good. He was only worth 4 wins last season, which is good, but not $30 million good. And when you consider he's only going to get just because he was an MVP before in his career does not mean he's going to be an MVP as he continues. We see that with Bryce Harper. So as he gets deeper into his 30s, his power starts to get worse, his bat speed starts to get worse, his defense starts to get worse, he becomes a DH only player. They're playing him $30 million until 2029. It's just not going to be tenable. And so he's a negative value contract, and the Yankees are one of the few teams that could actually endure that bad of a contract. And Yankees fans are going to be like, well, no, he's still good. He still can hit 50 home runs. Like, yes, he might be able to now, but will he be able to while he's 34, 33, 32, 35, 36, as you're still going to be paying him? No. You're going to be paying him until he's 39 years old. Do you really want to be paying 39-year-old Giancarlo Stanton $30 million? Absolutely not. But are you going to be paying him that? Yes. So is he a bad contract? Of course. And so, yes, the Marlins may not have gotten a great prospect return while trading him, but the great thing that they did get was getting out of that contract that was just so bad. So this is the kind of contract that would cripple a team. I don't think it's going to cripple the Yankees, but it's really going to hurt them as they get older. Next up, Oakland Athletics, DH Chris Davis. Similar sort of situation as Stanton. Not as much term. He's only been paid $16 million, which is 18% of the payroll for 2 more years. But he's been worth negative .5 WAR this season because he only has an 84 WRC plus because he's been hitting 227/296. He's never been an on-base machine. His game has been based off of his ability to hit homers. He had 50 last season. But when that power starts to dry up as he gets older, his offensive ability craters, and now he's a below-average run creator being paid, 18% of Oakland's payroll. So with zero defensive value, if he's not an above-average hitter at the DH spot, he's not going to be providing any value for your team, and he just simply is not worth the $16.5 million he's being paid, especially with, being a below-average hitter. I love Chris Davis. I genuinely do. I think he's a great player, but I just don't think he's great anymore. And I think, the Athletics, it was sort of a uncharacteristic move for them to be paying him this much. For paying a DH only aging slugger $16.5 million. Next up, the Philadelphia Phillies. Their worst contract is this might ruffle some feathers, but I believe that the Bryce Harper contract is the worst contract on Phillies books. And hear me out. Bryce Harper, you think of him, superstar, right? But when you actually look at his underlying numbers, he's not been worth 5 wins above replacement any year of his career except for 2015 when he posted 9.3. So really, you're paying him $26 million until 2032 when he's 39 years old. You're paying him that for the upside of that 9.5 WAR season. He can draw his rocks. He's not a bad hitter. He'll always be at least a 20% above average hitter. He's a 118 WRC plus this season. But will he be a 5 WAR player that you really need for $26 million? No, because he's not shown the ability to be a consistent 5-win player. He just hasn't. He's shown the ability to have, a spurt where he'll just have 9.3 WAR, but would you rather pay for a consistent 5 to 6 win player than a guy who's going to post maybe 2 or 3 wins above replacement and then maybe a 9-win season? Yes. So they're only paying him for his decline because he posted that 9.3 win season in his prime. and they're paying him mostly for his decline. So just because he's shown his ability to do that in the past doesn't mean he will continue to do that. And that's the central flaw with the Harper contract, and why I think it's really going to come back to bite them when he's, posting 2-win seasons. Like, I think he's going to age well because his eye is so good. Like, I think he's still going to be maybe a 1 or 2 win player as he gets into his mid-30s, but paying him $26 million for that player is just not worth it. So that's why I think Bryce Harper is the worst contract in their books. Next is the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, when you look at the Pittsburgh Pirates, they don't actually have any bad contracts on their books. I know Chris Archer has been bad, really bad this season, but he's being paid less than $10 million or just above $10 million with very little term. And the thing with the Pirates is that they don't have many contracts that have actual term or really serious financial obligations in them. So they don't have a bad contract on their books. That being said, is that an issue? And I think it is, because they've been doing the same thing as the D-backs, where they've been sort of halfway between rebuilding and competing, and their owner has not shown the willingness to pour financial resources into the team when it's necessary. Part of the reason why trading for Chris Archer was so expensive was because his contract was so cheap, because they wanted an ace that was controllable for not that expensive. So when you consider, they don't have very many bad contracts on their books, but that means that it's indicative of a bad situation that the team is in general, which is not having an owner that's willing to do what it takes to field a contending team, or do what it takes to tear down a rebuild and get them on a path to contention. So they're just a mediocre baseball team, and that's the worst thing you can be. And them not having any bad contracts is part of that, is part of why they're so mediocre. Next, San Diego Padres first baseman Eric Hosmer is their worst contract. He's being paid $20 million, which is 20% of their payroll until 2025, with 3 $13 million player options on the back end of that contract, which he'll most likely take, because he'll take $13 million a year until he's 36. He's worth 103 WRC plus and .6 WAR this season, but negative .1 WAR and 95 WRC plus last season, which means he's an average to below average hitter, playing decent but not incredible overrated first base defense on a team that could be playing someone like Josh Naylor as their first baseman. And they have a lot of good first base prospects that they can't play because they have Eric Hosmer locked up at first base until he's 36 years old. Yes, I know he's a leader, but is it worth paying $20 million to a below average to average hitter? No. Especially for a first baseman, you need them to be an above average hitter, and he's not. So if he does not provide elite first base defense, which isn't even valuable in itself that much, he just was not worth the contract when he signed it, and is not worth the contract now. Next would be the San Francisco Giants. They have a ton of bad contracts on their books. Long-term deals to aging players like Johnny Cato, Brandon Belt, Brandon Crawford, Jeff Samardzija, etc., Melanson. But the worst contract on their books would be third baseman Evan Longoria, because he's being paid $18.5 million until 2023 with a club option the year after, which will 100% chance it's not being picked up. He'll be 36 this season. He's got a 101 WRC plus for 1.4 WAR, but an 85 WRC plus and 0.4 WAR last season. This good season that he's having, average hitter, good defense season that he's been having this season is likely his last push for his career, and then they're going to be paying him $18.5 million for the next couple seasons when he's going to be a below average hitter, sub replacement level player, and for a team that desperately needs to start their rebuild, having that financial anchor that they traded for is really a bad contract and a bad situation to be in. Speaking of bad third base contracts on the West Coast, the Seattle Mariners are paying Kyle Seager $19 million until 2021 when he's 33 years old. The shift has totally killed Kyle Seager. Since teams have been aggressively shifting on him, he this season has a 65 WRC plus and been worth 0.1 WAR. He's a far below average hitter with decent defense, but a far below average hitter at third base on a team that's been desperately trying to clear payroll. He's just unmovable, and he's costing them wins. So paying him $19 million is not good. And I think he was a good player, but with how aggressively teams are shifting these days, he's just been killed by that, and he'll continue to be killed by that for the rest of his contract. Next is the St. Louis Cardinals. Their worst contract is Dexter Fowler, right fielder, $14.5 million until 2022 when he's 36 years old. He has 62 WRC plus for negative 1.2 WAR last season, but now he's a 102 WRC plus for 1.1 WAR this season when his BABIP was raised 100 points. So, is the Fowler contract? I do this thing where I ask myself a question and answer it. I don't really want to do it again, but what I'm saying is that the Fowler contract, he's a below average hitter unless he's incredibly lucky with, decent, if not incredible, right field defense, but he's not worth being the highest paid, player on their team. And that's what he is. And that's why them basically swapping him for Hayward. Hayward is also a bad contract on the Cubs. But the Fowler contract just didn't make sense at the time and still doesn't make sense now, and it's hurting their team's ability to compete because you consider, if they didn't have the Fowler contract, is Josh Donaldson most likely a Cardinal? Yeah. Would Josh Donaldson help them? Yeah. So when you consider the opportunity cost of that Dexter Fowler contract, it just makes it so much worse. Next is the Tampa Bay Rays. I love the Tampa Bay Rays. I'm not even a Rays fan. I just love what they're doing because they literally do not have any contracts above $5 million that aren't like retained salaries like for Encarnacion, besides Charlie Morton. And that Charlie Morton contract has decent term, and he's such a good pitcher. And they're just paying nothing for their team with no term. And so I was looking through their team, and I was trying to think, what's the worst contract? Yeah, Charlie Morton is only bad because he's actually being paid, but he's fully worth what he's being paid. So they're just doing such an incredible job, and that's why they're able to field such a competitive team by paying no money for it. And if I'm a Rays fan, I'm really happy with what they're doing. And I really hope they come to Montreal because I really want my Expos back, and I really want that Rays front office because they're doing something well there. But yeah, I know I'm not allowed to do this, but they don't have any bad contracts. Next is the Texas Rangers. Their worst contract is shortstop Elvis Andrus, being paid $15 million, which is 12% of their payroll until 2022. He'll be 34 this season. Has a 91 WRC plus, which is worth 1.9 WAR, because even if you're a below average hitter, having good shortstop defense still is going to make you an above replacement level player. But he's got 2 straight years of below WRC plus with high BABIP, and as he gets older, he's going to get worse. His power is going to get worse, and they don't have any really atrocious contracts on their books. When you consider the term on the Elvis Andrus contract and how many years left they're going to be paying him, it becomes their worst contract. It's nothing, absolutely terrible, but it's a bad contract. It genuinely is. Next is the Toronto Blue Jays. Their worst contract is shortstop Troy Tulowitzki, who is not currently playing for their team anymore, which is the biggest issue. And they're paying him $19 million this year, $14 million next year, and $4 million the year after that. And so when you're paying that much money for someone who's not playing for you, it's a bad contract. It's the worst contract on their team. Next up would be Washington, the last team, and they actually have decent books. They don't have any Zimmerman is a bad contract, but he's only got 1 year left. This is his last year, so it's nothing too bad. So I'd say the worst contract long-term for their team would be starting pitcher Patrick Corbin. He's being paid $25 million until 2025, with $35 million in 2024 when he's 35 years old. And they're paying, basically, the issue with that is they're paying him exclusively for his decline. He's worth 3.4 WAR with 3.31 ERA for 3.4 ERA, 3.31 FIP, worth 3.1 WAR this season. So he's still an elite pitcher, he genuinely is. But it's that back end of the contract that really is going to hurt them. But it's relative. Their books, their actual financial situation is relatively good. It's just because of how bad the back end of that contract is. It's why it's their worst contract. And philosophically, the Patrick Corbin contract is a very good example of why teams make free agent contracts. They're paying that terrible back end of the contract when they know he's going to be bad so that they can get that elite pitcher right now for no asset cost. So they know, they probably know that he's not going to be worth what he's worth now when he's 35. But I think philosophically, I just disagree with trying to build a team by sacrificing your ability to be financially flexible in the future. I just don't agree with that fundamentally. And I think that they're going to see when they're paying, Patrick Corbin $35 million when he's 35 years old, they're going to really be hurting. And the value that he gives them now is not worth the hurt that will be coming even next season. So those are the worst contracts. As you can tell, I hate building a team through free agency as a concept. I hate teams that give out big contracts. It's rarely ever worth it. And I'm very much an extremist in this sense. It's probably just because, the Indians don't really have much money, so anytime they give a big contract, I'm just inherently skeptical. But just be warned, teams that give out big contracts, because you could end up like one of these teams on this list and be really hurt. Be like the Rays. Don't be like the Orioles. Don't pay for Chris Davis. So thanks for listening, and gonna see you next time.